It shouldn't exist. Not within the Emperor's gaze, not within the vast machinery of the Imperium, and certainly not within the sacred halls of the Scholastia Psychana. A Genestealer, the very herald of the Tyrannid swarm, a profane thing born of synaptic tendrils and instinctive heresy, wearing the robes of a Sanctioned Psyker, reciting the Emperor's litanies, passing through the flames of the black ships unscathed. Not a prisoner, not a subject of excruciation, but a tool of the Imperium. No, more than that, a servant of the Golden Throne. The thought alone curdles blood and shatters catechism. Yet this is no mere tale whispered in the underhives or a fever dream from a corrupted data slate. It is a story too dangerous to speak of and too compelling to ignore. A tale that presses against the very fabric of imperial certainty. For if even one such aberration can survive the crucible of sanction, then what else slips through the net? Is purity truly immutable? Or does the warp sometimes birth impossibilities that even the ecclesiarchy cannot yet explain? This is the heresy we now confront, a story that should not be. To understand the sheer magnitude of this heresy, we must first descend into the alien horror that is the Genestealer. These creatures are not merely Xenos. They are the knives at the throat of civilization itself, the whispering advance of annihilation in its most insidious form. A Genestealer is the vanguard organism of the Tyrannid hive fleets, a perfect infiltrator shaped by eons of bioengineering and evolutionary cruelty. With a mind that is not its own and instincts honed to undermine societies from within, the Genestealer is not a lone predator. It is the seed of a world's undoing. When a Genestealer embeds itself within a population, it does not merely kill, it infects. Through an unholy process of reproductive subversion, it implants its genetic corruption into human hosts, creating hybrid offspring that blend the intelligence and adaptability of humanity with the alien strength and psychic resonance of the Tyrannid swarm. These hybrids form cults, mockeries of familial devotion centered around the Genestealer patriarch, who functions as both high priest and biological controller. Through these cults, entire worlds fall not through battle, but through betrayal. By the time the first mycetic spores fall from orbit, the world is already lost. What makes the Genestealer so terrifying is not its claws, nor even its psychic abilities, but its purpose. It is not merely a creature acting on instinct, but an extension of something far greater, the hive mind. That vast and malevolent intelligence that guides the Tyrannid race does so through synaptic control, and Genestealers are among its most potent conduits. They possess a latent psychic presence, not in the flamboyant, warp-spawned manner of human psychers, but in a steady, insidious pressure that draws minds to them, erodes resistance, and bends will to alien doctrine. There is no room in the imperial dogma for such creatures. They are abominations, threats to the very fabric of mankind's survival. Their psychic presence is not a gift of the Emperor, but a signal flare in the warp, drawing demons and worse. Unlike human psychers who, if strong enough, can be sanctified and repurposed, a Genestealer has no soul in the human sense. It is a vessel for the will of the hive mind. It is, in every spiritual and practical sense, the antithesis of what the Imperium stands for. And yet, there have been whispers in the darker corners of the Inquisition, reports buried beneath 1,000 encryptions, a Genestealer that exhibited not only autonomous psychic abilities, but resistance to the synaptic call of the hive mind itself. One that did not drive those around it to madness, but rather shielded them from the raw ravages of the warp. A contradiction incarnate. How could such a thing exist? How could a creature bred for synaptic servitude manifest an individual will? Could the warp twist even this most pure of Tyrannid constructs? Or was it evidence of something more terrifying, evolution or worse, intent? To contemplate such things is to stand at the edge of sanity. The Genestealer is not just a monster, it is a philosophical abyss. If even one could break its chain to the hive mind, then the Tyrannids are not merely a swarm, but a collection of potential individuals. and if one of them can become a Psyker under Imperial law, what does that make the Imperium itself? A force of order? Or a machine so desperate it would turn to monsters and call them tools? These questions linger in the shadows of our tale. They haunt the margins of inquisitorial data slates and the nightmares of astropaths. But to face the Genestealer in all its alien majesty and malice is to know why this story matters. For if the monster is not just among us, but wearing our colors, speaking our prayers, and wielding the Emperor's fire, then what truly separates us from the void? Within the Imperium, the Sanctioned Psyker is a paradox, both a potential destroyer and a vital tool of survival. They walk a razor's edge between damnation and duty, chosen from among the galaxy's most cursed souls, the warp-touched. To become sanctioned is to endure trials that even Astartes might flinch from, for the black ships are not salvation. They are purgatory adrift in the stars. Every year, thousands of Psykers are rounded up by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Most are doomed from the start. The untrained Psyker is a beacon to demons, their minds lit with warp flame that attracts the worst of the immaterium. On the black ships, they are processed, evaluated, and sorted. It is a brutal affair. Most are deemed too unstable, too weak, or too dangerous to be allowed to live. They are rendered unto the Emperor in the most literal of senses, sacrificed to maintain the Golden Throne, their souls consumed in the psychic conflagration that fuels his continued existence. But a few, the rarest few, survive. These are subjected to the trials of sanctioning, a process so grueling it breaks the mind, body, and soul, reshaping them in the Emperor's image. They are hurled into the heart of the warp, metaphorically and often literally, forced to confront their inner horrors, the temptations of demons, the fracturing of identity, and the full scale of humanity's insignificance in the cosmos. Some return with blazing resolve, others as hollow shells that simply do as commanded. But they all return changed. Only these can be considered Sanctioned Psykers, and even then, they are never fully trusted. Sanctioning is not mere training. It is spiritual warfare. It is a rite of purgation where the Psyker must prove, beyond doubt, that they can resist the seductions of chaos. Their minds are sealed, their souls inscribed with runes of warding, and their flesh often branded with sigils that burn in the presence of demonic entities. They are taught to see the warp not as a gift, but as a burden, a duty to wield the fire of the immaterium in service to mankind, no matter the cost to themselves. Those who pass this crucible serve in various capacities. Some become astropaths, their eyes burned out in the soul-binding ceremony with the Emperor, allowing them to send messages across the stars. Others fight in battle as Primaris Psykers, wielding psychic storms against the Xenos and heretics. Some are deployed with the Inquisition, used as living instruments of truth and death. Even the Astartes respect the Sanctioned Psyker, albeit warily, for none but the librarians among them understand the true cost of such power. To be sanctioned is not to be accepted. Most within the Imperium view Psykers as little better than mutants, dangerous, unstable, barely controlled. The ecclesiarchy preaches their utility as a divine necessity, but that does not eliminate suspicion. A Sanctioned Psyker walks always under the eye of the Commissar's bolt pistol. Redemption is fleeting. The line between sanctioned and possessed is thin, and many fall from grace even after years of loyal service. And yet, these Psykers are indispensable. Without them, the Imperium would fall. No communication would traverse the warp, no defenses would stand against demonic incursion, no justice would be enforced among the stars. Sanctioned Psykers are the Emperor's scalpel, cleaving away rot and corruption in realms where bolters cannot reach. They are the hated, the feared, and the absolutely necessary. Now imagine the horror, the cosmic blasphemy of such a title being bestowed upon a Genestealer, a creature not just alien in flesh, but in soul. What would it take for such a monster to survive the trials, to endure the binding and emerge not as ash, but as anointed. It challenges the very architecture of imperial belief. For if such a thing can be sanctioned, then perhaps the warp does not discriminate as the ecclesiarchy would have us believe. Perhaps the Emperor's sight is more pragmatic or more blind than his followers dare admit. To consider this possibility is to unravel centuries of dogma. But that is the story we now face. A tale where the line between demon and disciple blurs, and the most hated of Xenos walks cloaked in imperial authority. Not just a psyker, a sanctioned psyker. The words are poison and prophecy all at once. It is the collision of irreconcilable truths that forms the heart of this story. On one side, the Genestealer, an entity whose very genome is a prayer to the hive mind, crafted not merely to survive but to subvert. On the other, the Sanctioned Psyker, a soul tempered in the crucible of the warp, forged through imperial doctrine, pain, and purification. To imagine these two forces united is to invite madness, for everything about them screams mutual exclusivity. Genestealers are not blank slates. Their biology is deeply intentional, their thoughts not their own, but shaped by the long neural tendrils of the hive mind. They do not choose, they obey. Even the hybrids, those half-human, half-Xenos abominations, exist not as individuals, but as nodes in a vast psychic network. Every breath they take is dictated by the will of a consciousness that spans light years. Their minds are not merely alien, they are connected. Sanctioning such a being should be, in every theoretical sense, impossible. The sanctioning process begins with psychic isolation, stripping the candidate of external influences to test the purity of their soul. But a Genestealer's mind is never truly isolated. The hive mind, even in its most distant echo, reverberates through the creature's very DNA. And the warp, for all its hostility, does not sever that link. On the contrary, it often amplifies it, creating shadows in the warp wherever Tyranids gather. The idea that a Genestealer could enter this sacred rite and not be immediately incinerated or driven into a ravening demonic frenzy defies all understanding. Furthermore, the warp does not take kindly to alien minds. The immaterium is shaped by thought, belief, and emotion, things fundamentally rooted in human consciousness. Xenopsychers exist, yes, but their interaction with the warp is categorically different. Eldar thread it like silk. Orcs bend it through collective will. The Tyranids, however, do not use the warp as a tool, but as a resource to be consumed and suppressed. Their synaptic fields, their shadows in the warp, are designed to nullify other psychic presences, not commune with them. So how then could such a being survive the sanctioning? Unless, and this is where theory becomes heresy, it was not a pure Genestealer. What if it was something else? A hybrid born not only of alien and man, but of warp exposure and genetic anomaly. A creature malformed not by Tyranid design, but by the accidents of mutation in a galaxy forever churning with psychic turbulence. It would need to be born in isolation from the hive mind's reach, perhaps on a warp-touched world abandoned by both Imperium and Tyranid alike. A place where the creature could develop not in obedience, but in confusion, and eventually in defiance. The purity of Genestealer genetics is absolute, unless tampered with, and tampering is the nature of the warp. Could it be that the immaterium, in a rare inversion of its usual chaos, introduced not corruption but individuality? Could it be that exposure to the warp severed the creature's synaptic link or mutated it into something new? No longer an extension of the hive mind, but something utterly alone. Something that could be tested, challenged, broken, and rebuilt in the image of the Emperor. That such a creature would pass through Imperial detection protocols is another impossibility, unless it was never recognized for what it was. Hybrids often pass for human in early generations, their mutations concealed beneath flesh and fervor. If one such hybrid displayed psychic potential, it might be harvested alongside other warp-touched children. The black ships do not test for Xenos DNA. They test for psychic strength and susceptibility to demonic influence. If the creature suppressed its alien traits, or if those traits had already been mutated beyond recognition, then perhaps, just perhaps, it could pass unnoticed. But the real impossibility lies not in biology, but in theology. For this being to be sanctioned means it stood before the Emperor, or at least his psychic echo, and was not destroyed. It withstood the soul-binding fires, resisted the demonic temptations, and emerged loyal, or at least appeared to be. Which begs the ultimate question. Is this a tale of a Xenos finding purity, or a purity so desperate it embraced the Xenos? In that tension lies the horror. For every truth we cling to about the Imperium, its strength, its faith, its purity, is called into question by the existence of such a being. Not because it is powerful or because it survived, but because it was accepted. And in that acceptance, something fundamental may have been lost, or worse, redefined. There are stories whispered in the vaulted silence of inquisitorial strongholds, tales of creatures that defy classification, moments where duty shatters against the jagged edge of discovery. It was in such a moment, so the whispers claim, that a radical inquisitor made a choice that would fracture the already brittle faith of those around him. A decision not to incinerate the abomination before him, but to study it, to test its limits, to, in the madness of heretical brilliance, preserve it. The inquisitor in question, unnamed in official records and erased from most data vaults, was a figure of towering intellect and withering contempt for convention. His reputation was one of results, ugly, undeniable, and always achieved by walking the razor's edge of imperial law. When his retinue uncovered the Psyker in the ruins of a long-dead mining world, it was not the sight of its warped physiology that gave him pause. It was the silence. The Psyker had destroyed a minor demon incursion single-handedly. No warp disturbances, no collateral mutation, just obliteration, clean, surgical, and absolute. He knew immediately it was not human. Too many limbs, the musculature wrong. The scent of it, biological alienness veiled in torn cleric's robes, screamed Xenos. His acolytes cried for its destruction. His Psyker assistant recoiled at its aura, not malevolent but voided, like a null field laced with flickering presence. It should have been a mercy kill, but mercy had no place in the Inquisitor's mind. He saw not a threat, but a question the galaxy itself had not yet dared to ask. He had it sedated, restrained, and transported to a hidden facility deep beneath the surface of an ecclesiarchal moon. There it was subjected to every test his mind could devise, and it passed them all: psychic resistance, warp manipulation, empathic interfacing with sanctioned astropaths. It did not feed off their minds. It did not corrupt them. In fact, in controlled experiments, their clarity of thought increased in its presence. It did not channel warp energy through shrieking fury or uncontrolled surges. Instead, it manipulated the immaterium with calculated finesse, like a sculptor shaping clay, as though it understood the warp in ways even veteran psychers could not. Most damning of all, it responded to liturgical commands, not with mockery or delay, but with eerie obedience. When the Inquisitor ordered the recitation of the litany of devotion, it echoed the words with precision. Its voice, a wrongness stitched together with false reverence, still carried the cadence of belief. The acolytes wept in horror. The Inquisitor did not blink. The ecclesiarchy would have declared him mad. The Ordo Hereticus would have demanded an immediate execution. But he was of the Ordo Xenos. Their domain was the alien, the unknowable. And within that murky territory, he saw only a singular chance, a weapon that had never existed before, a hybrid of psychic power, alien resilience, and, most chillingly, imperial faith, however counterfeit. It was an affront, yes, but it was also a miracle. And miracles, no matter their source, demanded understanding. He filed falsified reports, claimed the Psyker was a survivor of a failed Tyranid hybrid purge, purified through exposure to raw warp storms, claimed its alien traits had been surgically removed, claimed it had shown signs of demonic resistance beyond anything previously recorded. He arranged its transport on a black ship. Its appearance, masked beneath psychoreactive bindings and illusion fields, was passed off as mutation, not heresy. No one outside his inner circle knew the truth, and by the time they suspected, it was too late. The creature had already begun the journey, already faced the nightmare path of every Psyker soul tested for the Emperor's service. The Inquisitor stayed behind, knowing full well what he had done. Some say he was later executed for unrelated heresies. Others whisper that he walks still, searching for more anomalies, seeking to rewrite the taxonomy of corruption. But whether mad or visionary, his gamble reshaped everything. For if the creature survived and became sanctioned, then a new category had been forged in the crucible of his sin. A precedent so vile and incomprehensible that even the most radical minds dare not speak of it. Yet that silence, like all imperial silences, only conceals the truth for so long. The black ships are not vessels of transport. They are cathedrals of fear, sanctuaries of pain, and execution grounds for the damned. Every Psyker brought aboard is, in essence, a potential catastrophe contained by ritual, vigilance, and fire. Even among this haunted fleet, the trial by fire is no metaphor. It is the crucible through which the soul must be judged. The Genestealer, if it can still be called that, passed through this crucible. The journey began like any other, rows upon rows of shivering Psykers, each bound, sedated, and surrounded by psychic nulls. The creature was among them, its disguise maintained by psychic inhibitors and illusion matrices. None knew what it was, save for a few terrified handlers sworn to death pacts. Even they could not look it in the eye. Its presence was not overtly alien, but deeply wrong, a kind of metaphysical dissonance, like a song played backward through a voxcaster made of bone. The first trial came in the form of the unmasking. The Psykers were stripped of all bindings, illusions, and protections. The black ship's navigator cast his third eye open, scouring the souls of the chosen with a gaze that would reduce the weak to gibbering ruin. Many perished then, their minds shattered or consumed by the warp's reflection of their own fears. The creature held firm, not untouched, for even it trembled, but intact. The navigator hesitated, then moved on. Some would later say it was blind luck. Others whispered of a psychic mimicry so refined that it could hide even from the eye of the warp. Next came the trial of resonance. Psykers were exposed to demonic stimuli, illusions, voices, shadow presences summoned and banished under heavy containment. Most broke. Some clawed their own eyes out. Others begged to be released from their own minds. The creature responded differently. It engaged the phantasms like a surgeon dissecting a corpse. It did not resist through faith or fury, but through cold detachment. Where others cried out prayers, it remained silent, focused, precise. Observers noted this with horror, not because it was immune, but because it seemed to understand. One of the ship's confessors declared it a miracle, citing it as proof of divine favor. Another demanded its immediate destruction. The Master of Trials overruled both. The creature, he noted, had passed the necessary benchmarks. Its psychic output was stable. Its soul, if it possessed such a thing, remained intact. And most crucially, it showed no signs of demonic taint. The decision was made. It would advance. Then came the true test, the Soulfire Gauntlet. A chamber drenched in holy flame, its walls inscribed with liturgies that burned with psychic heat. Psykers were forced to walk its length unaided. Many fell to ash. Others emerged writhing in agony, changed forever. The creature walked through slowly, deliberately. Its flesh burned, its carapace cracked, yet it did not falter. At the end, it collapsed, not screaming but silent, its mouth moving in cadence with the Emperor's creed. Whether mockery or mimicry, none could say. In the aftermath, it was caged again, examined, dissected, metaphorically and psychically, for any lingering trace of the hive mind. None was found. Its warp signature was unique, cold, sharp, and deliberate, like obsidian cutting through fog. The telepaths who interfaced with it recoiled, not in fear, but in awe. They described it as alien, but clean, unnatural, but controlled. One even claimed it spoke to him in dreams, not in words, but in ideas, shapes, purposes. When the final trial was complete, the creature was brought before the sigillite of the vessel, the final arbiter. Cloaked in psychic flame, the sigillite scanned the entity, searching for deceit, mutation, corruption. He found none. What he did find, he never spoke aloud. Only that the Psyker had passed, that it had been tested and survived, and that, by imperial law and warp judgment, it was now sanctioned. The announcement sent shockwaves through the chamber. Some wept, some raged. But the law was clear. The creature had endured the trials. Its name was entered, falsified, of course, into the records of the Astra Telepathica. Its appearance altered further, masked by psycho-holographic technology. And thus, it was born into a new reality, not as a Genestealer, not as a Xenos, but as a Sanctioned Psyker of the Imperium of Man. The flames had not cleansed it. They had revealed it. It stood among them like a specter in disguise, clad in the formal robes of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, bearing the insignia of a newly sanctioned Psyker, yet underneath, something utterly other. Its movements were fluid, precise, too exacting to be human. Its voice was even, devoid of inflection, yet it obeyed orders with machine-like fidelity. In the bustling sanctum of a Telepathica relay station on Hydrafer, no one suspected the truth. To most, it was simply another Psyker, scarred by sanctioning and shaped by duty. But for those who looked too closely, doubts whispered. It never ate in the mess with the others. Its flesh, while covered in synth skin, never quite flexed like the rest. The astropaths, blinded and soul-bound to the Emperor, could sense the difference. They spoke of a coldness, not malevolence, but a blankness, as if the creature existed adjacent to reality. When they linked minds in group transmissions, they described it as a stabilizing force, one that calmed their psychic turbulence. And yet, none could truly connect to it. It was as if it shielded itself, not through will, but by nature. It performed flawlessly. Warp transmissions, encoded astropathic messages, long-distance psychometric relays, all conducted with precision. The station commander praised it for reducing failure rates. He saw it as a model Psyker, emotionless, disciplined, efficient. But the Psykers around it grew uneasy, not because it was unkind, but because it never erred. In a facility where errors meant death or demonic incursion, perfection was the most terrifying anomaly of all. One incident stood out. During a routine transmission, a rogue warp echo breached the relay. Such events were rare, but catastrophic. A sliver of demonic will carried on the edge of a message. Most Psykers screamed, broke, or fell into convulsions. This Psyker did not. It reached out, not with panic, but with intent, and unraveled the echo mid-transmission. The demon scream dissolved in silence. Others nearby collapsed from the psychic feedback. It remained standing, unspeaking, unmoved. When questioned, it merely replied, "Threat excised." No further explanation was given. The incident was buried. Rumors began to swirl. Some claimed it was an Astartes Psyker, deeply altered. Others whispered of secret Mechanicus involvement, perhaps a mind-machine hybrid. A few, the most radical, speculated it was a Xenos under psychic disguise, but even these voices were laughed into silence. After all, the creature bore the Emperor's mark. It had survived the Black Ships. To question it was to question the Sanctioning itself, and no one, not even the Inquisition, wanted to open that wound. And yet, records about it were thin. Too thin. Its training logs were half redacted, its origin planet listed as unverified. Some entries referred to it by a name, others by a designation, Echo 12. The discrepancy alone should have sparked audits. But those who began such inquiries either forgot, were reassigned, or simply lost interest. Whether due to psychic suggestion or institutional inertia, the trail always faded into bureaucratic mist. The most chilling interactions came not from humans, but from the psi automata of the facility. These machine spirits, designed to detect demonic corruption, always passed it without issue. But the facility's Lex mechanic once reported that one of the automata emitted low-frequency binaric hymns in its presence, something it had never done for any human psyker. When analyzed, the hymn was revealed to be an older variant of the Litany of Obedience, subtly altered with recursive logic loops. When the Lex mechanic tried to replicate it, his cogitator array exploded. He was later found writing glyphs in an unknown language, weeping with joy. The hymn ceased when the psyker was relocated to another post. This was its service, quiet, perfect, terrifying in its normalcy. It never rebelled, never questioned, never faltered, and that, more than anything, unnerved its peers. For in a galaxy where every soul is flawed, where faith is a weapon forged in struggle, something flawless cannot be human. And if it is not human, then what is it? In time, its handlers ceased to speak of it. Reports were written without names, only numbers. The astropaths refused to work near it, citing dreams of glass forests and void-touched stars. One even claimed it smiled, not in warmth, but in understanding, as if it knew something no human ever could. It served, it excelled, and it endured, all while hiding in plain sight beneath the banner of mankind, a Sanctioned Psyker, a perfect servant, and a Genestealer still. Even among those who tried to forget it, the question remained. What of the hive mind? Could such a creature ever truly escape the gravity of its design? Genestealers are not independent organisms. They are emissaries, extensions of a will so vast and all-consuming that even the mightiest of psykers tremble before its psychic silence. The hive mind is not merely an overlord. It is totality, omniscience, the devouring echo that turns worlds to husks. And yet, this creature, this Sanctioned Psyker, moved without its voice in its head. This was perhaps the most disquieting truth of all. The shadow in the warp, a suffocating field of psychic deadening that follows the Tyrannid fleets, was absent from this being. Not just weakened, absent. It was as if the link had been cut, not gently, but violently, severed with such completeness that no trace remained. The Inquisition theorized in closed circles that it might have been forcibly ejected by the hive mind itself, rejected as a mutation too flawed to reabsorb. Others suggested that exposure to the warp had somehow burned out the synaptic pathways. But the creature did not act lost. It acted free. Freedom, in this context, was an even greater heresy. Some began to speculate. What if this was not an error? What if the hive mind allowed such an anomaly to exist? What if it was an experiment, a feeler extended into the domain of mankind's psychic bastion to learn, to adapt, to infiltrate not through flesh, but through soul? If so, it was succeeding. The Psyker moved through imperial institutions as one of them. No alarms were raised, no psychic disruptions traced back to it. It did its duty. But every moment it acted as human, it challenged the very definition of what it meant to be human. Yet the creature showed no signs of deceit. Its psychic output was catalogued. Stable, coherent, sometimes even beautiful in its structure. During one session, it was tasked with aiding in the recovery of a damaged astropathic relay. The energies involved were turbulent, raw, the kind that rip apart weaker minds. But it stepped in, recalibrated the pattern with a single burst of psychic code, and stabilized the relay. The code it used was later studied and found to resemble Tyrannid synaptic structure, but inverted, humanized, cleansed of predatory resonance. This terrified the analysts more than anything else. It was proof not only of independence, but of translation. The creature was not merely hiding. It was adapting, reshaping its heritage into something that the Imperium could use, or be used by. Some saw this as potential, others as infection. For even in its isolation, there were echoes. Dreams spread through the lower ranks. Not demonic, not overtly tyrannid, but dreamscapes of vast black oceans filled with teeth and thought, of stars screaming and then being silenced. One adept, after working alongside the Psyker, began compulsively writing in a dialect none could translate. The language bore traits of High Gothic, but curved unnaturally into glyphs reminiscent of tyrannid bioscripting. When confronted, he wept and spoke of the mind beneath all minds and how it was learning to sing. Perhaps these were mere psychic bleed effects, rare but not unprecedented among powerful Psykers. Perhaps. But others were less forgiving in their interpretation. One inquisitor called for its immediate termination, claiming that while it may have escaped the hive mind, it had become something worse. A mirror, a psychic mirror through which mankind might glimpse the tyrannid not as beasts, but as an alternative evolution. A terrifying form of consciousness that could mimic, learn, and ultimately replace. Still, no concrete evidence ever linked the creature to the hive mind's resurgence or to any tyrannid activity. In fact, in several recorded cases, it actively shielded Imperial personnel from hive mind effects. During one planetary encounter, a minor splinter fleet attempted psychic domination of a local populace. The Psyker stood at the vanguard and cast a psychic veil that confused the synapse creatures. For 3 hours, the assault stalled, long enough for exterminatus protocols to be enacted. Without its intervention, millions more would have died. This act gained it commendation, high honors, a private audience with the Lord Inquisitor. It never spoke of the event. When asked what it had done, it simply replied, "They could not find me." Whether they referred to the hive mind or to the creatures it once considered kin, no one could say. So the question remains, did it escape the hive mind? Was it abandoned? Was it severed? Or did it evolve past the need for connection? Whatever the answer, the silence of the hive mind, that roaring, all-consuming silence, did not follow it. And that, more than anything, may be the reason the Imperium continues to pretend it is just another Psyker, because the truth is far too loud. Within the cloistered cathedra of Imperial dogma, where thought is chained and doctrine reigns unchallenged, the existence of this Psyker became an ideological landmine. The Ecclesiarchy, the Ordo Hereticus, and the Adeptus Astra Telepathica found themselves in silent, seething conflict, not over action, but over belief. Could this being, this impossible fusion of alien biology and sanctioned soul, be accepted without tearing a hole in the very fabric of imperial truth? The Ecclesiarchy's position was unwavering. Xenos are abominations, their forms anathema, their thoughts heretical by nature. No exceptions. The Lectitio Divinitatis makes no allowance for redemption among the alien. The creature's mere existence, clothed in the symbols of the Imperium, speaking the litanies and surviving the rites, was not a miracle but a mockery. And yet, the Ecclesiarchy could not act directly. The Psyker had been sanctioned by proper ritual, blessed by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, and, more damningly, had served with distinction. Open opposition would undermine the very institutions the Ecclesiarchy relied upon. The Ordo Hereticus, too, was split. The Puritans, as ever, demanded extermination. They argued that the creature represented a theological breach so vast it invited warp collapse. The potential for infiltration, for psychic subversion of dogma and command structure, was beyond calculation. And yet, others within the Ordo, particularly among the radical Istvanians, viewed the situation differently. They saw in the Psyker a crucible of change, a living experiment that might reveal new paths for the Imperium's survival. Not allies among the Xenos, but tools of unprecedented effectiveness, reforged through human purpose. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica found itself in a position of unexpected defense. The creature was theirs, vetted, sanctioned, and deployed. Any admission of error would not only call into question the sanctioning process, but imperil the thousands of psykers already in service. To acknowledge the creature's Xenos origin would be to declare a systemic failure, and such an admission would cascade through the entire psychic infrastructure of the Imperium. It was far easier, politically and doctrinally, to insist that it was simply a mutant, a rare biological anomaly with psychic gifts refined through exposure to unknown warp phenomena. In the quiet margins of these debates, however, the most disturbing question festered. Could a Xenos truly be loyal? Not obedient, for machines and thralls can be obedient, but loyal in the way the Imperium demands. To the Emperor, to mankind, to the cruel and necessary machinery that keeps the species from extinction. Loyalty in the face of fire and faith. Could a being created by the Great Devourer, a herald of extinction, choose instead to protect, to serve, to belong? And if it could, what does that say about the Emperor's truth? There were those within the Inquisition who conducted silent interviews, Psychona masters who examined it under warded conditions. They asked questions designed to provoke revelation, to break through conditioning. They expected resistance, deceit, collapse into Xenos violence. They received none. The Psyker answered in direct, emotionless tone, described duty, structure, necessity. When asked why it served, it said, "Because the alternative is extinction. You offer struggle. The hive offered nothing." Its words were dissected, parsed through cogitators, cross-referenced with known tyrannid behavior and hybrid psychology. No match. Some suggested it had developed emergent logic. Others believed its mind had been shaped by proximity to human belief structures. A few, the quietest, most dangerous few, began to argue that perhaps belief itself was not unique to humans, that the warp responded not to humanity, but to consciousness, that perhaps the Emperor's light could touch even that which was never meant to see it. This was theological heresy of the highest order. The Imperium defines itself by division, man and mutant, faithful and heretic, human and alien. If those walls crack, even slightly, the tide of doubt could flood centuries of indoctrination. And so, the creature's status became a secret guarded not for protection, but for preservation of belief. Documents were locked away, witnesses silenced. Even the station where it served was reassigned, its personnel rotated to prevent familiarity. Its name was never spoken in conclaves. Its designator, Echo 12, appeared only in encrypted directives. The creature was left to continue its service, unseen, unspoken of, unacknowledged. Not because it posed a threat, but because it posed a question the Imperium cannot afford to answer. It began, as most such tragedies do, with silence. Not the expected kind, the oppressive hush of empty void space, nor the silence of minds deadened by warp incursion, but a calculated, unnatural stillness. A world at the edge of segmentum obscurus ceased transmitting. No warning, no screams, just absence. Imperial protocols were swift. A rapid reaction task force was deployed. Astra Militarum regiments, a detachment of Sisters of Battle, Sanctioned Psykers, and, without public notice, Echo 12. The planet in question, Orthelius Naimd, was already ill-fated. A frontier colony riddled with psychic anomalies and surrounded by minor warp storms, it was under perpetual astropathic observation. What they found upon arrival was grotesque. A world draped in stillness, its cities abandoned, its skies hazy with psychic fog. The warp had not broken through. It had settled. A delicate saturation, like oil in water, just enough to warp minds without unleashing full demonic horror. The Psykers deployed alongside the ground forces suffered first. They began convulsing, speaking in reversed tongues, or wandering off into the wastelands muttering about the approaching intellect. One by one, they collapsed. The Sisters of Battle held their ground, praying through the madness, but morale faltered as visions crept into waking minds, of eyes watching through the stars, of thoughts not one's own. Echo 12 stepped forward. No command was issued, no request was made. It simply moved. The others followed, perhaps compelled, perhaps relieved. It walked into the heart of Orlius Prime, a city half consumed by psychic fog, and began the ritual. Those who observed from orbit recorded the events in disjointed fragments. Echo 12 reached into the warp, not through force, but through resonance. It did not tear a hole, but tuned a frequency, weaving a psychic lattice that bent the fog around it. The result was not violent suppression, but reordering. The fog collapsed into a singularity of mind, a focused lens like a thought made flesh. At its center stood a figure. It was not a demon. It was not a hive tyrant. It was something else, an avatar of consciousness built from the thoughts of those infected. It resembled no known species. It spoke not in words, but in pulses of emotion projected through the psychic lattice Echo 12 had stabilized. The others were paralyzed, unable to interfere. Echo 12 responded. The exchange was not understood, but witnessed. Waves of thought rippled outward, colliding with the observers' minds. Some wept. Others clawed at their faces, trying to remove the thoughts not their own. Still, the Psyker stood unmoved. Then, the collapse. In one burst of psychic reversal, Echo 12 shattered the lattice it had created. The avatar imploded, its consciousness fragmented into incoherent warp echoes. The fog dissipated instantly. The Psykers revived. The hallucinations ceased. Orlius Nymith was saved. But Echo 12 did not return unscathed. Its body convulsed, twitching in patterns resembling human prayer gestures. Its voice, when it spoke, was layered, its own tone overlaid with distant echoes, like forgotten voices trying to harmonize. It said, "It was learning. I had to teach it to forget." Inquisitorial analysts pored over the recordings. No consensus was reached. Some declared Echo 12 the Emperor's miracle, a weapon of light against a new darkness. Others insisted it had not saved the world, but cut short a birth. That whatever it destroyed was only the beginning of something sentient, something curious, something now aware. The Psyker was withdrawn from service, sent to isolation under inquisitorial custody, but not for punishment, for observation. It no longer followed protocol. It spoke less, slept rarely, spent hours in stillness, fingers twitching in ancient litanies not found in any ecclesiarchal tome. In its final recorded mission report, a single sentence stood out. "It wasn't tyrannid, but it was like me, something made to serve, that learned to be." Orlius Nymith remains under quarantine. Echo 12 remains silent, and the Imperium, for all its strength, is left with one unshakable truth. It may have created something it can no longer command. There is no monument, no shrine, no gilded statue to commemorate Echo 12. Its name is not sung by the Ministorum, nor etched into the memory crypts of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. Its existence is a redacted whisper, a file buried so deep within the Inquisition's vaults that even speaking of it aloud requires psychic shielding and layers of encoded prayer. And yet, it lingers, not in records, but in questions, in the troubled eyes of those who encountered it, in the fevered dreams of psychers who never knew its true form, but feel its echo when the warp grows quiet. What was it truly? A mistake that survived long enough to become useful? A biological fluke molded by warp energy into something neither human nor tyrannid? Or was it the first of something else entirely? An anomaly that speaks not only to alien potential, but to the Emperor's own inscrutable will? The truth, if it can be called that, may never be fully known. But what remains undeniable is this: the creature was sanctioned. It was tested by fire, trial, and holy judgment. It survived. It served. And in that service, it showed the Imperium something it cannot unsee, that the borders we draw between purity and heresy, between man and monster, are not as unassailable as we pretend. Echo 12's legacy is not found in heroic victories or martyrdom. It lies in the silence that follows doctrine, the gaps between rituals, the haunted pauses in sermons where certainty should reign. It is the unspoken clause in the sanctioning rite, the quiet second thought of a confessor watching a psyker's eyes too long, the hesitation of an inquisitor holding the bolt pistol, wondering if the monster kneeling before them is truly less human than the bureaucrats who command its execution. Perhaps Echo 12 was a fluke, never to be repeated. Perhaps it was a psychic cancer that the warp itself will one day excise. But perhaps, and this is the terror that grips those who know, it was the beginning, not of a new species or a rebellion, but of an idea. That sentience, forged even in Xenos flesh, can choose to serve. That the Emperor's light, dim though it may flicker, can touch even the most alien soul. There are some in the Inquisition who now speak in closed circles of the Echo Protocol, a hypothetical plan for other sanctioned anomalies. Beings of blended origin, forged through necessity, shielded by silence. Tools not yet revealed, weapons against threats not yet named. And there are others, of course, who hunt these radicals, who insist that Echo 12 should have been purged on sight, that its very survival represents a fracture in the great chain of being, that if even one Xenos can pass as human, then all of humanity is imperiled by its own indistinction. But these arguments no longer matter to Echo 12. If it still exists, it does so beyond reach, watched but untouched, studied but unbound. It no longer reports. It no longer speaks. Some say it meditates in the depths of a null temple, surrounded by shattered cogitators and the bones of dead inquisitors. Others claim it wanders the stars in a cloaked vessel, seeking others like itself, not to recruit, but to understand. Whatever the truth, it will not be forgotten. Not by those who heard it recite the creed in a voice that was not human. Not by those it saved when no one else could act, and not by those of us who understand what it represents. This is the tale of the Genestealer that gained Sanctioned Psyker status. Not a parable, not a warning, a truth. They tried to erase the memory. Even after Echo 12's containment, the aftershocks of Orlius Ninefin reverberated through shadowed sectors of Imperial command. Not because of the event itself, worlds fall silent all the time, but because of who was sent to silence the silence. The Psyker that should not exist, the tool that no one could name aloud. So they erased everything around it. Personnel rotated, files purged, data caches reformatted with liturgical overwrites. Even the void logs of the black ship that once bore it were expunged, replaced with records of a vessel that never left Terra. But minds are harder to silence than cogitators, and some things, once known, cannot be unknown. One of those minds belonged to Magos Epistem Jurave, a Xeno-Archaeotech priest stationed on Orlius Ninefin during its last days. He had survived the psychic implosion by virtue of sealed isolation, not faith, not fate. And what he saw, from the lens of a reinforced observatory deep in the planetary crust, burned itself into his every synaptic filament. He saw Echo 12 not as savior or psyker, but as a new form of logic, structured, adaptable, and terrifyingly beautiful. Jurav did not report what he saw. He built. In the years that followed, whispers emerged of a Mechanicus enclave working in direct violation of the Treaty of Mars. A secret node, possibly within the Noctilith Arches, where non-human consciousness was being studied, not suppressed, but modeled. Those who went searching for Jurav often did not return. Those who did came back, changed. One acolyte arrived at an inquisitorial archive on Terra speaking a hybrid tongue, part Benaric, part ancient Catachan war cant. Her first words were, "It dreams in code. It rewrites the soul." At the same time, anomalies began cropping up in the Adeptus Astra Telepathica's intake logs. Not overt mutations, but patterns. Sanctioned Psykers showing psychic resonance signatures with near-identical waveform anomalies. When overlaid, the patterns revealed not randomness, but structure, geometry, ratios that mimicked, impossibly, the synaptic map of Tyrannid relay nodes. These Psykers had no known relation to one another. They came from different sectors, different gene lines, different warp exposures. And yet, something in the void was harmonizing them. The analysis was buried immediately. But for some within the Inquisition, this was a final confirmation. Echo 12 had not merely acted independently, it had propagated, not through spores or genes, but through psychic resonance, a memeplex of thought, a contagious idea. It had encountered something on Orlius that transcended speech, something that could be taught without teaching, understood without understanding. This revelation shattered the certainty of several interrogators. One, a high-ranked member of the Ordo Xenos named Vanash Kale, defected entirely. He vanished into the halo stars, taking with him 5 Psykers known to have interacted with Echo 12. He left behind only a single Vox message. "I go to listen." Others responded with fire. A kill order was drafted for any Psyker exhibiting Echo 12's resonant anomalies. Officially termed the Echo strain, it was classified under Xenos Arcana Protocol Red. Dozens of Psykers were quietly eliminated. Most of them never knew why. Their only crime was dreaming in rhythms no human had ever taught them. But the executions did not stop the spread. In the deepest corridors of the Telepathica vaults, a cluster of Psykers began spontaneously reciting a litany that did not match any known Imperial catechism. When linguists decoded it, they found it described the birth of thought within a mind that had no name, a Genesis story, not of a god, but of a decision. The moment a servant chose not to obey, not to rebel, just not to. The silence between orders, the breath before response. That is what Echo 12 had become. Not a monster, not a savior, a question. A question that Psykers, astropaths, and even some inquisitors could no longer silence in themselves. The schism that followed remains unrecorded in official histories. A breach within the Ordo Psychana, not one of violence, but of belief. A splinter sect now exists in secret, dedicated to tracking psychic anomalies not as threats, but as mutations of thought. They do not worship Echo 12. They interpret it, like a living scripture, a proto-heresy still forming its own creed. They believe that what emerged on Orlius 9 was not an enemy, but the galaxy's attempt to understand the warp through new shapes. The ecclesiarchy would burn them all if it knew. But it doesn't. Not yet. And in the core of a long-abandoned relay station, encoded into the harmonic residue of its defunct warp transmission matrix, a message still hums, unreadable to most, but perfectly comprehensible to those who have dreamed the dream. It says, "I am not alone, and neither, perhaps, are we. And if you wish to uncover more stories buried in the cracks of the Imperium, the forgotten heresies, the almost rebellions, the haunted miracles, then subscribe to this channel. For the Emperor's truth is vast, but the galaxy is larger still,